stand-up's going great. I'm loving that. Paid for it. That's so cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, like it's like you're like, that's nice. I love Monkey Barrel. I'm starting to do more of the stand. It's fun. It's a different vibe. It's really nice. And then just the independent shows, like people are so funny here. I think the level of comedy is like a couple steps up. And this isn't like a fuck you to Canada. It just is like, you come here and you see the comedy and you're just like, I gotta work harder. Like everyone is just baseline. The Glaswegian who meet on the street is so funny. You're like, God, I need to like actually think about how I'm framing this and the mechanisms of my stand-up and how I'm coming off.
Yeah, it's an interesting country. Like, humor is universal, but I guess you could say that some cities are more likely to laugh at things, or they just find
the bands, man.
It's almost like sometimes they have to struggle a bit more, so they're just constantly like trying to cope. So they're constantly just joking.
It's that they've all got the John Cleese freshly divorced vibe on them, and there's something very good about it. But I think it's it's so much more based in storytelling and they welcome the absurdity, and like I always kind of frame it as in Canada I would be like an absurd comedian. I'd be like the avant-garde one, alternative. But here I'm like, I do have some odder bits, but like I'm quite straightforward.
Yeah, I would never call you an absurd
But that's
comedian.
because compared to the other comedians in Canada, even just being like, I got a little funny voice, they'd be like, that's not, where's your jokes, ma'am? Like, or I walked off one stage, and I remember a man walked up to me, and he was just like, but that was more like of a storytelling. And I was like, it's just one of those things you're like, I didn't ask. He was also performing, and I was like, I did better than you. So like, I'm sorry,
Fuck
my
you
story.
too, buddy.
But it's like people trying to process being like, well, she wasn't actually just doing like, she wasn't trying to, that's the story. And I'm like, here you're like, but sometimes
the story is funny.
Yes. And like you work out how to put punchlines in. Yeah, I should do more of that. But like, I'm finding your place on stage and what people expect from you is really interesting. So yeah, I think like the standard of comedy is so high here and absurd, and like the way you go to see a comedy show at the Fringe and it's just like two people in sailor suits pretending to be twins, and you're like, what? This is amazing. Like, how does this work? And I would never see that in, Montreal. So it's just like expanding your view of what's possible and what's happening.
I mean, sometimes the Fringe can be the Fringe, but you
like,
got to have all of that.
Honestly, when I first watched something at the Fringe, all I remember thinking is like, oh, are you allowed to do that? Because again, it was just like going back to Baby Kate of being like, it's not that anyone said I couldn't. It's just that you assume with what you see, you want to fit in. And you don't I don't like wake up in the morning being like, I'm going to fucking smash some fucking, glass ceilings or frames. I'm going to blow everyone's mind of what theater is. Like, no. Yeah, because if you're trying to like smash people's minds, you're going to create the worst movie ever, because that's the point of it, is to smash people's minds instead of like the story, the character. Yeah. So it's like seeing it and going, oh, you're allowed. You're allowed to have this crazy thing to the side, or, and you're just like, so it kind of sets you free in that way, watching this absurdness. And they don't pay in Canada as much. So, yeah, they pay shit.
I'm cutting this. So there's going to be a whole rant, and at the end I'm just going to put in, and they don't pay as much in Canada.
They don't pay in Canada. Like, oh my God, you go to a comedy show, they give you $5. You're like, oh my God, thank you. Like, you're excited for $5.
That's a paid gig.
Yeah.
Bro. Yeah, I mean,
and then you're like, hey, they're like, I'm so sorry, but all we have is 100 pounds for this. And you're like, I'll let it slide this time. Oh my God. Like, it's so, you're like, fuck yes. Yeah.
Yeah, comedy is an interesting culture. Like, it's unique because there's a lot of weirdness in it. Like, and there's obviously, everyone's got their own egos, and then that comes out in some of the wildest ways. Like, the comments you get and you give to each other, you're like, who fucking needed that? But whatever. But there's also something beautiful about it, like broken but beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing about stand-up that doesn't have to exist, is those like, people can get really weird and jealous and like try and knock you down in these ways, and you're like,
Yeah.
because it's only one person on a stage at a time, and I think people feel like, well, there's only that many seats around the table. You're like, build a longer table, like make if you have. I think the show you're going to, Darren, is such an amazing example of being like, he's had success, and so he invites people onto his show, he invites people onto his podcast, he makes a show, he makes a pod. He's like, he is creating like content for comedy, and I think like the idea of like passing it forward and passing it on and like helping people take a step up is so important. And I think that's why improv is truly like, before you go on stage in improv, you all pat each other's backs and you go, I got your back, because you're a team on stage.
Yeah.
So then moving to stand-up was quite like, whoa, because people are just like, I hope you fail. Okay, have a good set, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, man. Like,
have you actually had...
People will never say, I hope you fail, but like, in like a million little ways they will. Like, and I don't think, like, when you're at the back of the room, you're just like, oh, did I do better than them? It's this weird thing of like, you're constantly comparing yourself, but like, you're trying to retrain your brain to be like, oh, I hope this just is an amazing show. I hope everyone does well.
Yeah.
But there is always that kind of like, you want to be seen as the funniest. And I think that's hurtful, instead of just being like, how can we work together?
No, I can relate to that. Like, I think in the beginning, everyone's like, oh, I hope I do well. Everyone just wants to do well and wants to be good. And then, you go up and you're like, well, I guess I did okay.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going after a while. You're like, well, sometimes you do you hope for the best, you try really hard.
Yeah.
And then whatever happens, happens.
Or just like knowing how to fix it on stage. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.